Hey everyone, welcome to a hybrid video I decided to create. I think this will be a fun experience because rather than just talking about this Ketsui 1-all, which, well, for a lot of the hardcore players may not be too interesting to hear from me, but I also do want to do commentary or do some kind of video for my somewhat minor Shmup achievements, Going forward, I decided to do this commentary, but also tackle a topic that I've been wanting to talk about that KZ has wanted me to talk about as well. And so I thought, what a fitting hybrid, right? Because what game tests your shmup mentality harder than Ketsui? So what I'm going to do is just start talking about my experience with what shmup mentality is and how it's developed for me, especially during the Dodonpachi 2-all. That's where I really experienced the most growth as a player. And then going forward, what lessons I've learned and what advice I could give when it comes to shmup practice and shmup mentality. And I think this Ketsui 1-all is just a good kind of culmination of me putting those skills into effect, where I got the 1-all fairly quickly, and it wasn't easy, I wouldn't say, but it wasn't as stressful as my previous 1-all attempts, in the past. Even though I think Ketsui is much harder 1-all than Black Label or DOJ for sure, or Black Label, DOJ, or DDP. So what I want to start off is actually talking about, I think the first thing you want to do, which a lot of people maybe don't like to think about, is you kind of have to begin by assessing what your skill level is as a player. Because what you're going to do with your shmup mentality and practice routine is heavily based on your skill level. And so I think, a lot of people don't like to consider themselves not highly skilled, but at the same time, I think people also don't like to consider themselves too skilled either. We all kind of like to just think of ourselves as average. And there's been a lot of debate among shmup players, at least just in conversations that I've had since joining the scene, a year and a half to 2 years ago, about what is a good player, what is a bad player, what makes someone a casual, what makes someone hardcore, those types of things. And I think, people really struggle with definitions because, as you get better, your standards are going to raise, right? So I like to think about it on a more macro scale rather than on some kind of idealistic type of scale, where we factor in Japanese super players and all those sorts of things. I think just on a more macro scale, I would say average skill level is someone who is able to achieve a 1-all in a cave game, or a normal clear in a Toho game, normal to hard, kind of in that area. You're able to get that to happen. That would be average skill. And then above average would be you're able to push forward into more difficult clears or more difficult scoring achievements, like the DDP 2-all. I think would be my transition from being average to somewhat above average. How much above average, I'm not sure, but somewhat, just because that, in order to achieve that goal, it took a lot of pushing myself as a player, because Cave does not give it up easy with those 2-alls, at least Dodonpachi. So you have to really push yourself and start to hone in on what mistakes you're making, what your weaknesses are as a player, those types of things. And so the first thing that I think a lot of players need to start doing as far as their shmup mentality is they need to start setting goals for themselves that match their skill level but push you a little bit past it. So that's kind of the thing, is I think most people either set too easy goals for themselves, to be honest. And this is me playing Ketsui, getting a 1-all after getting a DDP 2-all. And so I would say this goal for me, is a little bit of a too easy goal. Now that I've pushed myself into the kind of 2-all territory, Ketsui 1-all would not be for me, a challenging goal. It was a challenge, but it wasn't truly challenging. And so I think that's what players need to start doing, because once you go into that mindset, I think you have gone from casual to hardcore. That's all the difference is for me, is casual players play within their comfort zone and they stay in their comfort zone and maybe slowly over time challenge themselves just through sheer experience. But for me, hardcore players are players that actively push beyond their skill level. And so it doesn't really matter what your skill level is, as long as you're setting a goal that's somewhat outside it, but is achievable, and you're pushing towards it. I think that's what, and you care. That's what makes you a hardcore player in my book. So those are basically the criteria. And so with shmup mentality, you're going to have to start thinking about how you play shmups and how you approach shmups in a wider, more macro scale. Instead of thinking about it, very minutely as one clear, or for instance, I'm gonna clear Dodonpachi, get a 1-all, and then I'll clear DOJ and get a 1-all, and then maybe graduate up to Ket and get a 1-all. If you're feeling like you're still getting challenged and you're still getting pushed, then I think that's a good way to set a goal. But what I would consider, if you want to get better as a player and you want to improve your skills and mentality, you need to start setting goals that push you, that frustrate you, that make you reconsider how you're going about things, and make you optimize how you play the games. And that's what's going to help you improve as a player. And I can say that from experience because I did have some gradual skill growth from going from DDP to DOJ. Those 1-alls, the DOJ is slightly harder. And I did have some gradual skill growth there. And also just through experience, my fundamentals of moving my ship got better. My understanding of patterns got better. So all that stuff is good. But when I went from doing that to practicing for a DDP 2-all, the amount of focus I had to put into the genre skyrocketed. The amount of things I had to consider. And what really helped me when it comes to shmup mentality is you have to sort of confront that wall of difficulty that up to this point you think is unbeatable. And that was how it was with the second loop of Dodonpachi, going into that, and a lot of those boss fights, hibachi, all that stuff. When I first started playing all those levels and difficulties, I thought this shit is straight up impossible. I don't know how I'm gonna do this. And really, I don't think I would have kept pushing it other than I said I was gonna do it, and I'm a stubborn guy, and so I kept at it. But, I think what you need to start doing is you need to have a little bit of faith in yourself beyond your normal skill level right now. And you need to just understand that it's going to be slowly building over time, and that your progress and improvement is not going to be like immediate, or it's not going to be even immediately noticeable at times. And then there's going to be days where you feel like you're not improving at all, or you may be even going backwards somewhat. Because you know that it kind of goes in cycles of, so some days you will play really well. I've had days in the past where I've played at the skill level I am at now, just for whatever reason, for that day I was on it, and I was just destroying Dodonpachi. I was like, I got this shit. And then I went 3 weeks after that where I was just dying in the first loop a bunch. I felt like I was regressing, going backwards. It was very frustrating. And so with shmup mentality, you have to think in the long term, and you have to just have faith that the skills you're learning are going to build on themselves, because it's just slowly, degree by degree, you improve in shmups. That's kind of how shmups work. There's going to be times where you'll have massive jumps in your skill because you realize some fundamental concepts, like maybe you understand how tap dodging works now, and that's actually going to help you a lot. You're going to, like when I finally put my head around why tap dodging is useful, that did jump my skill up quite a bit. Or just things like you start to understand how to deal with certain patterns, or you start to understand how to deal with certain enemy formations that up to that point had seemed unbeatable. So those types of things, you can get a pretty marked jump up in skill. But for the most part, a lot of it just comes down to confidence through experience and knowledge through experience. And so that's why the the conversation of shmup talent is always an interesting one, right? Because I did mention in the past, I wrote that article about it, where I do feel like certain people are innately more talented at shmups than others, because I feel like they're better at pattern recognition, they're better at understanding the underlying mechanics of how the genre works more quickly. But at the same time, I think if you just keep at it, you keep studying, you keep practicing, that understanding will come to even players who aren't naturally gifted at shmups. Like myself, I wouldn't consider myself naturally gifted at them, but I'm just stubborn and a little bit obsessive, and so that's what kind of pushed me as a player further, is just consistently attacking these issues, consistently attacking these games over and over and over, thinking about it, studying it, those types of things. And so I think it will all even out. It just comes down to how much, not just time as in physical hours, but how much mental energy you're willing to commit to the genre and how much failure you're willing to put up with, because I think that's the main reason why a lot of people, casual players, won't push beyond their comfort zone, is because you're going to be met with a lot of failure and frustration. There's no escaping that. You kind of have to just accept that's going to happen. You're going to fail a lot, and you're going to be frustrated very often, and you're going to feel like, inadequate compared to your peers, right? Like when Pearl started playing Dodonpachi and got to Hibachi in like 2 weeks after I'd spent months and months. In that point, I felt very like, wow, I'm shitty. I suck. Because look at how much faster he got to the same place than I had, and seemingly without nearly as much effort, right? And so you just have to understand that there's a lot of legacy skill in the genre, and Pearl's an amazing player in other games, and so that a lot of that skill just transferred over to Dodonpachi. And so at the same time, though, I kept pushing Dodonpachi, right? I kept going. I kept at it, because getting to Hibachi is like 80%, maybe 70%, but that other 30% of actually beating him is a whole nother ball game. So it could almost be like a whole nother loop at that point. And so I guess I'll talk about now specifics of what I've found to be really helpful with shmup mentality. The first one is desensitization. I've talked about this, I think, a few times maybe. But desensitization is merely... So for instance, when I first started playing DOJ especially, I became extremely nervous in DOJ in stages 4 and 5. Because, that's when I'd be getting near the 1-all, and, my heart would get racing. I'd start playing more nervously and usually making mistakes. And at the time, I tried my best to kind of overcome that. And then when I got into Dodonpachi and I started going for the 2-all, whenever I hit the second loop, like literally the second that second loop started, my heart would just jump up in pace. Like my heart rate would increase. I'd feel nervous, and I'd like bomb any sign of danger. I'd just nail the bomb button because I was just not as confident. And for a long time, I dealt with that, and it was extremely frustrating of wondering, okay, why in save state practice can I, play my usual skill level, but as soon as I get in a full run and I hit the second loop, now I'm playing scared. I'm playing definitely below my usual skill level. And that just comes from nerves, and that's just a natural human response. Shows that you care. So it's a good thing that you care, because that's what's going to keep you going in the genre. But at the same time, it's usually going to hold you back a little bit from playing your best. And so the only way that I've found to really get rid of that is through sheer desensitization, through sheer repetition of getting to the second loop and just doing it over and over and over until your brain starts to say, okay, getting to the second loop. It's like your inner brain needs to start accepting certain things or setting certain milestones further out. So my inner brain would start to say, okay, getting to the second loop is not a big deal, so I'm not going to be nervous if I get to the second loop. Now I'm going to get nervous when I'm in stage 2-3, because that's a big deal. And then I kept at it, grinding more sessions, more save state practice over and over, building and building on that. And then my brain would start to say, okay, 2-3 is kind of a big deal, but it's not that big of a deal. 2-5 is the big deal. So once we get to 2-5, that's when we get nervous. And really, by the time I got to my clear, I never really conquered that far off. So I would start to get nervous in 2-5, and then from then forward until I got the clear, that never went away. But there'd be times where I'd start to put resource limits on my nervousness too. So I would kind of tell myself, okay, I can't feasibly clear this game unless I have this many lives and this many bombs. So if I get to stage 2-5 with less than that, I'll play it out, but it's just going to be for the sake of practice, because there's no way I'm going to clear Hibachi with this many amount of lives and stuff. And so that's why I said in my 2-all commentary that even though I think I made a mistake in 2-5 or 2-6 or something where I lost a life I definitely didn't need to, I was saying that I didn't necessarily regret that in retrospect, because it made me play less nervously going into Hibachi in the Big B fight, because a part of my brain thought the only way to get this 2-all is to play perfectly and to play without worrying about anything. I've got nothing to lose, basically. I'm probably not going to clear this. And so that fear or that nervousness did not kick in until literally the final attack, when it dawned on me, holy crap, I might be able to actually clear this. And luckily I was able to just hold it together long enough to get the clear. And actually what I've found too, talking about nervousness and feeling nervous, is that what's really interesting for me is now that whenever I play games that I consider within my skill level, or I consider maybe not challenging my skill level, for instance like Ketsui 1-all, just strictly survival, whenever I start to get those nerves like I did here in stage 5, I can almost perfectly channel them into just pure concentration at this point. Because to me, there's really nothing on the line. There's that confidence of, okay, now I can clear Ketsui 1-all. This is my game. I can clear this. I don't need to worry about it. I'm just gonna play well. And then some points I kind of, like, whenever I get down to 1 bomb, like, okay, so I have no bombs with this life. A lot of the times, hopefully this comes through in the replay, but a lot of times, especially in my stream, whenever I came down to no bombs, nothing to lose, I kind of got a little bit of a cockiness to me where I was like, okay, there's nothing to lose. Now I'm going to show off to everyone on stream or everyone watching the vid how good my dodging skills are. And so I would start to play more confidently almost every single time whenever I'd have no bombs left. And so that's a part of my own shmup mentality that comes into kind of my decision making, where I'd start to, this doesn't really work for scoring, because in scoring you really don't bomb ever, so this doesn't come into factor. But for survival, there's lots of points where I will just bomb, I have 1 bomb left, so I'll find a spot that's relatively risky and just bomb, and then play out the rest without the bomb. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've been finding with shmup mentality that's extremely useful, is to start to become aware of what's making you nervous, why, and kind of coaching yourself through some strategies of how I'm going to feel less nervous. And a lot of it is going to just come down to strictly repetition and desensitization. So the last thing I want to end on before I get because this has kind of gotten, I forget how short this is that I think also having effective practice is really important, and what effective practice looks like. So it's going to be different for everyone based on your skill level, based on your goals, based on what you're trying to do. But keep in mind that usually if you're playing the game and you're trying, you're not just, credit feeding or not really trying, you're gaining some sort of useful skill in the game, even if it's not the route that you're ultimately going to play, or if it's not even the ship that you're ultimately going to play. Just that exposure to the game is going to help you. But if you're wanting to really maximize your time with shmups, I've actually found that there is no one formula. Instead, you're going to want, at least what I do now, is I kind of take a mixed approach of what I do. For instance, so I'll break down this Ketsui 1-all, what I did. So I felt like my base knowledge of the game was good enough to get the 1-all just because I had played here and there, probably about 80 hours overall over the past 2 years. Just playing the game in stages here and there, practicing the bosses here and there. So I kind of had the baseline understanding. And so what I did was, instead of doing something like doing all full runs or all save state practice, what I did was I just started off by doing a full run and kind of coming up with my outline of my route based on the full run. And then after that, I would start to pinpoint weak spots in the run. For instance, the stage 3 carrier with the extend in it, that was a big weak spot because that was not only a chance to gain an extra extend, but it's also a place where I was dying. So it could be a 2-life swing there. So I put a big gold star on that part of the game and said, okay, I need to learn this in detail. So then I made a save state. I just practiced it over and over, kind of experimenting. I watched a little bit of Moglar and stuff to kind of get some ideas from him, but I did also just do a lot of it on my own as well, kind of pinpointing what's the best way to go about this, what way feels good for me. And I'd do that before every session. Every time I sit down and do full runs, I'd spend like 30 minutes practicing that section until I got it to where I could get it fairly consistently. And then I did the same thing with certain boss patterns where I said, okay, this boss pattern screws me up a lot. Or the stage 4 mid-boss, okay, this mid-boss screws me out of a bunch of lives. Same thing with the stage 4, that spinning final attack. That could take some unnecessary resources from me, so I save stated and practiced there. And so I started to just pinpoint what sections of the game were causing me trouble, and and how much time each of them would probably take to get the clear. And there were some sections like the elevator where I didn't really practice the elevator that much. It's probably obvious in my replay, but I figured I get the other sections solid enough. Unfortunately, I had a run before this, but it didn't end up clearing, where I did no miss, no bomb the elevator, and it looked awesome. But in this run, I play like crap on the elevator, so it doesn't quite stand up. But I started to realize, okay, the elevator is one of the hardest sections in the game, but at the same time, I can get through it with just one bomb. If I just bomb once, I don't really need to put in nearly as much time. So again, if I was playing for score, or if I was playing for a larger goal, that wouldn't be a good strategy. But to optimize my own route and to optimize my own goal, I said, okay, I could just bomb here. It would be worth the resource. Same thing with the boss, the final boss, the stage 5 boss. There were certain patterns where I felt like, okay, I need to learn this pattern, in detail. And I learned most of his patterns in detail just because I find boss fights are usually my strong point, and what's going to save me in the run is usually going to be my boss fight skills. But there's also certain patterns where they just really screw me up a lot. So I said, okay, on this pattern, if a bomb's available, I will bomb. If I have one left, I will try for the pattern and then bomb the next pattern. Those types of things. So before I'm ever playing and before I'm actually in the run, I'm making these decisions ahead of time. That way when you're playing, you can just commit to them without having to double think. And that's what Dodonpachi, the 2-all, really taught me, is that going into the run, especially in the second loop, I would have kind of like a flow chart of what I would do based on the bombs, based on my lives, based on what needs to happen. So coming into 2-3, for instance, I would say, okay, I would always bomb this section in 2-3. The mid-boss in 2-3, I will always bomb. The boss in 2-3, I will always bomb him, because they're going to be the most likely places for me to die. The Hall of Hell, the same thing. At a certain point in the Hall of Hell, I'll always bomb. And so in Ketsui, I did the same thing too, with stage 5. If I had a bomb on the elevator, I'll bomb. If I didn't, then I would just flail around and hope to survive, right? But then there'd be other sections where I thought, okay, if I have X amount of bombs, I'll try and play for it. I'll play it out. It's worth the risk. So yeah, that risk reward stuff, deciding all that beforehand is really useful. And I guess my last bit of advice that I want to give, I mean, I'm going to do much more on this topic because there's a lot to go over. But my last bit of advice would be visualizing yourself achieving your goal. That's why save states are extremely useful, just beyond, you know, the time convenience and everything. They're also useful because they can literally help you visualize your goal. For instance, before I got the 2-all, there was a part of my brain that felt like I could actually never achieve it. It can't be done. It's just too hard. There's so many places that I can fail. And in Dodonpachi, in that 2-all, I could literally lose a run in 30 seconds. I could play perfectly for 40 minutes and in 30 seconds lose it. I mean, it's brutal. And so at the end there, I started to, especially when I was starting to get more and more runs to Hibachi, I started to realize, okay, beating Hibachi needs to be a priority. So I put a lot of time into practicing him a lot. But I also would save state practice and then create scenarios in the save states to play out. Like, oh, I'm coming into Hibachi with only 2 lives, so I gotta play like this. Or I'm coming to Hibachi with 4 lives, now I can play like this, or whatever it is. And then also before the run, I'd actually sit down. This is some like new agey stuff, so I don't know if it's actually legit or not. But I would sit down and visualize myself beating Hibachi. I would sit down, close my eyes, and visualize the final attack, and visualize myself destroying the final attack and winning. And I feel like when I was actually put in that position, doing those visualization exercises did help me. And so I think that's another bit of advice maybe for if you have a certain section that just seems insurmountable to you or just is scary to you, maybe do some visualization practice of sitting and mentally in your brain trying to replay the scenario of what happens and what you need to do, and then visualizing yourself achieving it, which helped me a lot. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. I've gone a little bit over the 1-all time, but I think it's a fun topic. Yeah, thanks for watching.